Hello, welcome everyone to the Management and Social Justice Conversation series. As many of you are aware, the series explores the intersection of social justice and management practices in various organizational settings and how we can enhance it. Today, we have a wonderful speaker to facilitate a great workshop here. And let me introduce Mies. Mies is a senior action learning coach and the director on board of the World Institute of Action Learning for Action Learning. And I welcome Mies to the Emancipatory Organization Development through Action Learning workshop. Welcome, Mies.
Thank you so much, Akil, for having me here today. I feel quite honored to join this conversation, this ongoing Management for Social Justice conference, and to have an opportunity to talk about action learning, which has potential in being used as a form of emancipatory organizational development. At least that is my strong belief, my hypothesis. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to have, as much as it's possible within this virtual format, uh, an interactive time together. I will also be presenting quite a lot, and sometimes that's kind of a dilemma being an action learning coach, because um, if action learning is anything, it's the opposite of only sending information and broadcasting information, um, and not being responsive to whatever comes back at you after doing that. And that's going to be a little bit challenging in this virtual format. I would love it if people could show their faces as much as possible so that I can respond to some of the facial expressions that I'm seeing. And also, I would encourage you to really generously use the chat to respond, to ask questions, to be critical. Um, Anything that pops up, please feel free to share. I'll keep an eye on it um, as much as I can while I'm presenting. And we've also built in some ways to be interactive, like polling. There will be a breakout room and there will be 2 Q&A moments. And during these Q&A moments, I will be joined by a special guest, which I will introduce later during that first Q&A. So that's how we're going to approach this workshop today. Again, thank you all so much for joining the conversation about action learning. I'm going to share my screen. And I also want to share, while I start kind of a first kind of presentation part of this meeting, that I just want to make sure to make clear that, so today, being here today, I'm really speaking as an enthusiast practitioner of this method. I am a senior action learning coach with the World Institute for Action Learning. I also work for other organizations. That being said, today I'm just speaking on my own behalf because I think that way I can be the least limited by any organizations or brands that I am affiliated with. I think everybody will recognize this tension in our day-to-day work. It's all about having an open conversation. So I'm going to be contributing from that point of view. And I also would like to add, because I think it's a good custom within this conference, that my pronouns are usually him and he. Without further ado, I'm just going to jump in. And for the technical team, please feel free to jump in whenever needed. And for anybody else on the call, you can unmute yourself. And I think we need to prevent chaos from happening. But if you want to jump in and ask a question at any time, we can always see if we can facilitate that. Can be quite experimental here today. So what we will do today is discuss the historic origins of action learning and contemporary applications in leadership development, coaching, and organizational development and learning. We will also describe presenting problems that are appropriate for action learning. We will also explain emancipatory design principles for action learning, the way I see it. This is an idea that is shaping up and building on some research that has been done by other people previously. And we will discuss and describe opportunities to further develop action learning as an emancipatory form of organizational learning. And we'll unpack what I mean by that as we move through this workshop today. So to start, I want to ask a polling question, and I think Christina is going to bring that up right now for everybody to respond to. And this first polling question is, to what extent do you agree to this statement? My voice weighs in when important decisions that affect me or my work are being made in my organization or community. So it's exciting to see the results come in. I think we're stabilizing. Okay, that's great. It's great to see that a majority of people agrees, or the majority of people actually agrees. We see that now in orange, or tends to agree. There's a group undecided, and then there's a group that tends to disagree or disagrees. Thanks. I think we can then close out that poll. I'm not going to discuss these results as much, but the theme of these polling questions will be discussed more thoroughly throughout the presentation and the conversation that we're going to have. So let me define first what action learning is and what it is not. Action learning is a powerful group process that equips individuals, teams, communities, and organizations to solve real and complicated problems and at the same time develop strong leadership skills. And the key word here is, for me at least, or the key aspect here is in the phrasing of at the same time. Because we are bringing groups together to solve real problems, that provides a context and an opportunity to develop strong leadership skills. Because we focus on developing leadership skills in these conversations, we're being helped in solving real and complicated problems. The focus on leadership skills really brings a deliberateness to the communication in these meetings that helps in problem solving. So that's it. It's not a new process. It's been around for a while. I'll talk about the historic origins, but this is the kind of best definition of action learning that I can give. And just to add for clarity, these groups are about 4 to 8 participants, include about 4 to 8 participants, never more than 8. The 9th participant is the action learning coach who guides the group through the process of problem solving. What action learning is not, it is not active learning, it's not action-based learning, it is not experiential learning. There are links with those other concepts. Sometimes you'll see in practice that action learning is used to sometimes describe experiential learning. But if we're really clear on the definition, these are really different ways of working on learning in organizations and communities. Action learning is also not a simulation or a scenario. It is really about solving real current problems in organizations that people are stuck with, I would say. So this man is the inventor, I could say, or originator of action learning, and his name is Reginald Revance. And he's not a very known figure, I would say, in this world of learning and organizational development and management consulting. Though his ideas over time have been extremely influential, but there's some mystique around this person. I think one of what he would say, I've never met him, obviously, but I think in his spirits, he could have said that it's really not about him. It's about the people he's working with. And even though he could have been considered as a guru of organizational learning, like we know others in our field, he's quite unknown. And I think that's actually quite charming about him. There's also some mystique. He grew up in a time in a family where his father was actually on the inquiry committee that was tasked to figure out what happened to the Titanic. Where did that go wrong? So he grew up in a family where these questions were being asked all the time. And I'll explain that inquiry is a big part of action learning, asking questions and asking the right questions. And I think it's just interesting that inquiry must also have been part of that family life. Um, he's also an, an Olympian. He competed in the Olympics as an athlete. That's also interesting about him. In the 1920s, he was a doctoral student of astrophysics in Cambridge. And in the 1940s, he was a member of the coal board. And the first thing he was tasked with on the coal board in the UK was to increase productivity in the coal mines. And his kind of insight there was not to ask managers how to increase productivity, but to work directly with the coal miners. And this was interesting because imagine going into a coal mine with a team and running into problems into that coal mine. Before Reginald Revance came, it takes lots of effort to get down there and to be faced with the work. And then if you run into a problem fairly easy in your workday that you can't solve, there's nothing left to do but leave and look for help, because that help surely isn't available on the spot. So what Revance did was design a process of inquiry named action learning that these coal miners could practice on the spot, deep down in those mines without having to consult a manager or an expert to be able to still problem solve, unlocking their um, inherent knowledge, I would say, which was, I think, a great idea at the time. It's not a new idea, but I think in many organizations and communities, this is still a very important idea to practice. Um, So he developed action learning as a process whereby the participant studies his own actions and experience with others to solve problems. This is one of his books, ABC of Action Learning, Reginald Revance. I have another example here of an old, golden old book. This one is called Protect Your Achilles Heel. I have just developed a really strong appetite and excitement about these older management books because they are often filled with amazing ideas. I think in our field, we often look at what's the next shiny process for organizational development and learning, but there's so many great older ideas that we can still really benefit from. And in that, with that appreciation, like valuing it in the time that when it was written, his book ABC of Action Learning is also a really interesting kind of original source, evergreen source to look at. Coming back, taking this kind of journey about action learning, this history a little bit into our current times, that work of Reginald Revance has kind of accelerated and developed into many different approaches for action learning. I would definitely not propose that of course, there are best practices, but that there's one way of doing action learning. The most popular and the most distinct, I think, and the most practiced one around the world is the method that is being promoted and governed and further developed by the World Institute for Action Learning. A little plug, I'm on the board of this non-for-profit organization. And the World Institute of Action Learning was established in the early 2000s, but it started forming in the 1990s because of an initiative by Michael Marquardt, who was at the time a professor of human resources development and international affairs at George Washington University. And he met Reginald Revance a couple of times, and he worked with Reginald Revance to further develop the method and to make it really applicable for a wide range of coaches, I would say, around the world, while also as many people on board, like myself, who certify people to become action learning coaches. Um, and that method is described in this book called Optimizing the Power of Action Learning by Michael Marquardt, but many other uh, key players within the World Institute for Action Learning, like Shannon Banks, Peter Kouwelier, who's currently our president, Chung Seng Nung, and many other colleagues that I have there. And I would say that contemporary while action learning practice reflects an integration of the theory and experience of the ideas of Reginald Revance in the UK and Europe, but also ideas like laboratory learning and experiential learning developed in the US in the past century, as well as ideas that are central to socio-technical systems theory. And action learning builds on ideas of people like Bertrand Luffy, Eric Trist, Fred Emery, Chris Argyris, and Peter Senge. So for the theory lovers in this in this meeting today, there you go. It all comes together in action learning. Um, and Reginald Revance worked with a lot of these thinkers in our field on a personal basis. There's an affiliation with action research as well, although action research definitely is something different than action learning. I'm going to stop talking soon and ask something of you, but I'm going to continue a little bit. So continue the story about what is action learning, how does it work, just in terms of process. First, in an organization, there is a problem that is wicked and real. Then action learning is introduced by the coach to the organization as a potential process to solve the problem. And the coach works with the organization to assemble a diverse team of 4 to 8 participants who can then be gathered to solve the problem. They do that in an action learning session or action learning sessions, because not one session is not always enough. And in those sessions, there is a process flow using the power of inquiry, so really asking questions of one another. The team is coached to find agreement on the problem, really looking at the diversity of the voices in the room, really also building on the adversity between these people to look at the differences first before enabling integration and agreement on the problem. And then only once the problem is agreed upon by all partners at the table, they can start planning a strategy or collaborative action to start addressing the problem. And there's lots of attention throughout for reflecting on the process. I'll get more into all of these aspects later, but this is just to create an overview. And then um, the last step, I would say, is commitment to action. So the time between sessions is used to test actions and leadership skills and to experience what really works. So even though we weren't talking about agile yet or iterative processes that much in the 1940s, when all of this came into being, this fits really well into that mindset for organizational development. Revance, at his time at Cambridge, met Albert Einstein, who told Revance, if you are sure you understand the problem, make sure you're not deceiving yourself. And that started much of his thinking, really challenging the way we think about problem solving. And I just included on these slides, without going into it too much, a few important quotes that Revance is known for that I think can help us understand the mechanics, but also the proposition of action learning a little bit better. The first one is very well known. There can be no action without, no learning without action, and no deliberate action without learning. The second one is less known, but I think super important for today's organizations and communities, is that the ultimate power of a successful general staff lies not in the brilliance of its individual members, but in the cross-fertilization of its collective abilities. And this is so important. Revance really questions the role experts and managers can play in problem solving. Yes, they have a role, but it is a limited role. And the danger of using the voice of managers and experts as a dominant factor, or allowing that to be a dominating factor in organizations, has the downside that we're not unlocking the collective abilities of the organization and the great ideas that live in the minds of the workers and the practitioners that are available in the organization. That's also why at the start, when I introduced myself, I really want to position myself here as a practitioner, uh, to, as much as possible, really practice these action learning ideas. And the last phrase that he coined that I wanted to mention is action learning allows us to be comrades in adversity. So that sounds a little bit too old fashioned or too kind of 20th century for me. I would just translate that into friends in adversity. We can, we're humans, people are perfectly capable of having a conversation that starts with disagreement. It's a little bit um, uncomfortable for us, or very, sometimes very uncomfortable for us, but to find comfort in disagreement is a big factor of being able to solve problems or overcome differences in the end, without saying that all differences need to be overcome. Just wanted to add that. So just some philosophy, or underlying philosophy to clarify. So I already spoke a little bit about the emphasis on inquiry. So I think action learning really is effective in lifting restrictions for people to participate um, in conversations about important problems in communities and organizations. That is possible because there is one really hardcore rule, one hardcore restriction being introduced in these sessions. And that rule is, during an action learning session, you can only make a statement in response to a question. So you can only speak when somebody has asked you to speak. And when you answer the question, the rule also includes that you should answer questions asked concisely and only what is being asked. So if you want to contribute and take initiative in these sessions, it can only be done by asking questions. And whilst that is restricting and can be very frustrating for people at first when they, for the first time, participate in these sessions, soon they discover the power of asking questions, because it just opens up all these new perspectives that as an individual, you're just incapable as one human being of thinking of. So this is a really important rule and aspect of action learning, and it's challenging in itself. And just practicing that rule and coaching people to learn, to discover the freedom within this restriction leads to the development of leadership skills. And at the beginning of a session, the coach will ask each participant to choose a different leadership skill. I included some examples here, the ones that I would use as a coach. Action learning provides an opportunity to train yourself to really listen, to focus on what emerges, to ask powerful questions, to build on each other's questions, to dig deeper, to pause, to move forward, to be concise, to explore different opinions, to help others reflect, and so on and so on and so on. So if you would sit in an action learning session, at the start of it, I would explain this rule and how that works, and that you're restricted by that rule, but it's also a learning process. So you're allowed to fail in practicing that rule. That's completely fine. And what will help you in practice the rule is selecting a leadership skill to focus on during the session. And then at the end of the session, I will ask, so you've practiced really listening during this session. How was that for you? What did you learn? And how can you transfer that skill to your actual day-to-day work? And what would be the impact if you really listened even better in your day-to-day work? So I already spoke a little bit about the role of the coach. The coach I should start with that, create conditions for learning. I'll be talking more about that later because this is also a very restricted role that this coach has. Um, the coach does not advise or get involved in solving the problem. That's very hard for any coach, also for me, because you sit into these sessions and people talk about real issues. advice is going to form in your mind and you just want to say, you know what you should be doing, but we refrain from that and instead we allow people to come up with their own solutions to their own problems. The coach does not set any other rules than the one rule that I just introduced. All of the other process choices that a group can make. Can you use a phone? Can you step out to go to the toilet? Can we add 50 minutes to the session? The coach will always say, up to the group to decide. Discuss this with your team. Only one rule is important to me, and the rest is up to you. And the coach intervenes when they see an opportunity for learning and to increase team performance in solving the problem. So the coach has an authority to stop the group and to ask questions like, um, how are we doing on a scale of 1 to 10? What are we doing well? Could we be doing better? How are we doing at using the power of questions to allow ourselves to solve problems? How are we doing managing the balance of participation? All sorts of process questions to help the group evaluate themselves and then plan to do even better. Second polling question, Christina. I always ask permission from others before I take action or initiative to solve important problems in my organization or community. We're very divided on this one, but it also shows that we tend to agree or tend to disagree. So that's kind of close to one another. I think there is no right or wrong answer to this question. There's nothing wrong with asking permission. It's a balance, I think. And I think if I can paraphrase that on behalf of us as a community here today, we kind of agree on that. Tend to disagree. Most people say that. We don't always ask permission. Good. So the topic today is not just about action learning, but it's about viewing action learning as an emancipatory, as a form of emancipatory organizational development. And I think I just see the potential in action learning to be that. If it's used in the right way, if it's coached in the right way, I do think that element of that potential to be used as a form of emancipatory organizational development is there, because part of the process is radical delegation of authority to solve problems and make decisions and evaluate the process to the team. So this is about managers telling staff, and staff can, by the way, also be a group of managers, but this is about the organization delegating authority to a group of people to start solving a problem by taking actions and to be okay with whatever outcome. Of course, there can be a dialogue about the outcome, but to give that group ownership in that process. While doing that, experts and hierarchical managers' views can be included, but they cannot dominate the conversation. Anybody who can help in solving the problem is asked to join in. And even beyond that, there's even a big value placed within action learning on naive perspectives, because people who are not experts or who haven't been focused on certain topics throughout their whole career or in their schooling can ask naive questions or open questions that can completely break us out of our mold when we're trying to solve important problems. Problems exist because we don't have a solution yet. That is what action learning says. These problems can exist in organizations because we don't have a solution yet. That solution has yet to emerge. Expertise or programmed knowledge is not the solution. If it was the solution, the problem wouldn't exist. That is the line of thinking. and we can all benefit from including diverse perspectives in these conversations. Another element that I think is emancipatory is that this is another statement from Reginald Revance. Those who are to change significantly that which they freshly encounter must themselves be changed by the changing of it. You know, emancipation makes us think of empowerment and it makes us think of liberation, I think. But part of that process, part of strengthening yourself, part of emancipating yourself as an individual, as a group, within any context, also means taking a hard look at yourself. Also means studying how you as an individual are part of the problem, in some way, can take ownership of the problem, and then can start influencing the problem. So it all moves through critical self-reflection first. It's not about other people need to change something. It is about I need to change something. And that's confrontational. I've experienced that myself. That's not always easy, but that work does pay off, and it feels really good afterwards when you've been able to contribute to a solution that at the same time has also strengthened your position in an organization or a community. And then I just included this little icon here at the right to show that learning effects and organizational development effects there's a trickle effect. People learn on an individual basis, they learn on a team basis, and there's also lots of organizational learning and development, which is the result of can be the result of these action learning sessions, I should say. So what type of problems are suited for action learning? A whole myriad of problems is suited, I would say, as long as they are real and urgent and complex, so not easily solved, not solved by looking up some of that program knowledge, really requiring a new solution that is applicable in the exact context of this community of or organization. It's really about very deliberate application. So it needs to be real, no case studies, scenarios, past problems, or simulations, something that we're really facing today. So I have some examples of problems. Key stakeholders are not engaged in important strategic projects. I think we've all faced that at some point in our careers. Repeated conflicts between co-workers in two departments. Great problem for action learning. A company's hiring practices are racist or sexist. Also a good one to address. A startup didn't acquire enough funding. Also painful problem. Or sales dropped 20% because there is a new competitor in the region. Just included a few examples here. Basically, I hope this kind of range of examples makes it clear. Anything that is experienced as a wicked, real, urgent, complex problem can be brought to an action learning table. You could also do it with a family or with a group of friends, or the context doesn't necessarily have to be organizational. The group will go through a process of problem presentation, reflection on the problem through inquiry, deconstructing the problem to a level where we can take ownership of the problem, and then reconstructing it so that we can start taking action. All right, I've talked enough. We're going to go now into breakout sessions, and afterwards we're going to have an interactive debrief. The breakout will take 12 minutes, so that's quite short, and you will be meeting 2 other people that are on this call. So please also use it to build connections. I think that should be fun, or to gossip about me and my pink sweater. And the question I would propose for you to discuss is, what could be an example of a problem that you or your organization or community currently faces that you could bring to an action learning table, to an action learning team? That's the question. We worked together in the past at the New York Public Library. That's in our former lives. So I thought this is a great opportunity to reconnect with Tiffany. Tiffany has organized many action learning sessions for her team to participate in, and her staff to participate in. She's also participated in many action learning sessions herself, dabbled in coaching, or is coaching, I should say. Dabbled is too light. And so Tiffany, maybe you want to say a little bit more to introduce yourself, and I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you, Mies. I'm great. I'm excited to be here. So again, my name is Tiffany Alston, and I am a co-director for the neighborhood libraries at DC Public Library. So hi Charmaine, hi Allison. I see a couple of people that I recognize. I oversee 12 of the libraries in the District of Columbia out of the 25. And my daughter just came in, so you'll hear the front door ding. And I work very closely with 14 direct reports, and I have loved using action learning from my New York Public Library days, where it was introduced to me by Mies, and I appreciate it. I am working on my certification to be an official coach. I have one more session. Very excited. So before the end of the year, I will be a coach. And hopefully working Highlands. And we'll be working with others to really just help support them. And the reason that I love action learning is because it empowers people. It pushes us to think deeper about some of the questions that we need to answer to get to solve the problem. That is really what it is. I mean, we don't want to overthink action learning, but what we want to do is have people to not just present the question. It really is like a sort of critical thinking. It gets us to a deeper point where we're able to solve our problems. I use it even in my personal life with my daughter's dad. I'm like, well, really, what is the problem we're trying to solve here? And it's not about our opinion. So, you can use this in your personal life, you can use it at work. And it's just a great function. So Mies, I'm so excited that you introduced me to it. I worked with Mies, was it in 2019? He came and did some work with my colleagues. And I just was saying to him that my supervisor was like, tell him I said hello. Everybody's excited. We love it. We love using this work. As an organization, I mean, we're 700 people in the organization. And as we know, everyone doesn't always align. Everybody's passionate about the work, but we don't always agree on how to get to the work. So we use it in any way possible.
So I would ask you, Tiffany, as a leader of a large group of people, you said you have 14 direct reports, and then there's a whole huge group of people.
Hundreds of people under them
yeah. So this is you're running a massive organization, which I am so in awe of. You have really succeeded using action learning to delegate problem ownership and solving problems to your staff, which is not always easy for managers to do that, to let go of that control. How have you experienced that? And what have the results been?
It isn't easy to delegate, especially when you know the answers to the questions that people are asking and you just want to provide them. But one of the things that I always stand firm on is how did I get to the point of knowing the answer to the question? Wasn't that I was always told, it was that I was allowed to explore. Right.
Yeah.
So that goes into that exploration piece of delegating and allowing people to come to the conclusion. There's not only one way to do something and there's not one path. So you present it to people to say, well, this is the problem. So say the problem is we aren't hearing one another as departments, and we're trying to get to a solution to get the libraries cleaned. I'm just using this. We want to get the libraries cleaned, but the staff feel like they should be cleaned before they come in, and the staff or the frontline staff feel like it should be done before they come in. And the cleaning staff is like, well, I start the same time as you. How do we get to that solution where the building gets cleaned, it's satisfactory, but it's not about right or wrong? So we say to people, so what's the real issue? And through the questioning, you'll find that the real issue is the cleaning products may irritate people's senses. And so they weren't saying that initially. What they were saying is like, this needs to be done at this time. And it became a power struggle. But in releasing that and to say, well, not only what is the real issue, what's the issue you're trying to solve, and how do you think we can solve this? Like, how can we work together? So if this person starts at the same time as you and we're all working together, what is the plan that we can come up with? And having people think through that, and where they'll come back and say, well, they can start on the 3rd floor and I can be on the 1st floor initiating, and then we can flip. That has really been a problem that has been solved in this way, where people realize that they had to work together to collaborate. And a collaboration is important and it's a hard thing to do, but through delegation, just empowering them and letting them know that I'm here for support, I'm here to guide, they come back and I'll ask more questions. Yeah.
And that just reminds me that, you know, we are together in
Yes.
organizations and in communities because we share an objective, which is
Yes.
whatever is the main purpose of that organization. But within that group exists a whole variety of different interests. And there are always some people's interests are always dominating or considered to be more valid than other people's. And within these action learning sessions, and I think you're describing that, it's not possible to start working on a solution before all voices are heard. At least all voices that are at the table are heard. And there was one question in the chat, and I thought that was very interesting, about who selects the team. So who decides who gets to sit at that action learning table and gets to participate in the solution. And the limitation of the team being at maximum 8 people is because that's the maximum of group conversation that allows for kind of collaborative problem solving. More people, it becomes too complicated. That being said, it is possible to organize in a program series of action learning groups working on the same problem at the same time. And debriefing with one another what their solution is. So there is a way programmatically to include more than 8 people, but a strong action learning coach that is involved in assembling the right group for a problem will take as a starting point, it needs to be a group that includes a diversity of perspectives, all the most important perspectives. But then the question is, who decides what is the most important, or what are all the perspectives? It gets, in that sense, quite detailed. And the better the coach is, the more thought and deliberate they can be in guiding the organization to selecting the right people. And that process in itself, action learning hasn't even started yet, is already an intervention, I think. What do you think, Tiffany?
Oh, I'm on mute, of course. Absolutely. I think it does become complicated, but having that right group of people. So when we did it, what was it? About 7 or 8 of us, including, right? It was 8 of us who did it.
In DC?
At DC, yes.
Yeah, so this was, so you can, it's just you can assemble groups in very different ways, I would say. With your team, when we did it with your team, Tiffany, it was the whole intact team, and we invite, that didn't make for 8 people. So we in a series of sessions, we included all sorts of other people in the different sessions to kind of add other perspective. And your whole team was included, but it's also very possible to include people from very different teams, to not work with an intact team, but just form a team, a group specifically for solving a certain problem. And
So
beyond that, yeah, and beyond that, it's even possible to bring together a group of 8 people that are all representative of a different organization. That can also be, like, for instance, I would just love to bring together an action learning group with representatives of 8 different organizations that all work on the bigger diversity, equity, and inclusion questions that we face, the harder issues, and to learn together about solving those from a multi-organizational perspective. That would be another way of assembling it, but there's lots of freedom in application, I would say.
Absolutely is. I think there was a
There was also a question about how can you use this in a company suffering from COVID? How would you do that, Tiffany?
oh well. I was saying to Mies yesterday. We had a very intense meeting with managers, and there are a lot of deep feelings about being heard at this time. So a lot about COVID is like practices and policies, but it's also people being heard and acknowledgement that we are going through a very difficult time, but it's not in isolation to whatever your organization or wherever you're working is. It's that it's a worldwide thing, and so. Like I said, having to do this and just kind of popping into the chat and asking people questions like, well, what does being heard feel like? When you say being heard, we've had listening sessions. I didn't say this, but like in my head, I was thinking we've had listening sessions. So instead of me coming to the solution, I said, what does that look like from your perspective? And so it got people to think deeper about, wait, what am I actually saying? And one of the things that came up at the end after they all realized they discussed it wasn't that they felt like they were being heard. They just felt like we didn't acknowledge that there was a lot of loss and people lost, whether it was people, time, people love the work and are passionate, that there was a lot of loss in this time. So just asking those deeper questions even get people to thinking about what they're actually saying. Like the initial question wasn't it was actually something that was in the back of mind. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to go to a question that Anthony Myers. Anthony, I'm so happy you're here. Asks, he says, can you talk about the impact of representational power on the power dynamics within action learning groups? Meaning the impact of knowing someone's power that they hold outside of the group. Think about authority, race, gender, class, that is known by others in the group may already impact group behavior. Who is quiet, who speaks up more? Super important, relevant question. I'm going to be talking a little bit about these themes in the kind of next step of the presentation. But Anthony, I want to make sure I get back to you on that in case I don't cover it completely. So there's more Q&A in about 15 minutes. So I want to make sure that we have a kind of a one-on-one at the end of this webinar where we bring you in, like we're bringing in Tiffany now, to talk about that.
Yes.
Um,
And what I'll do is I'll also put my email address in the chat if anybody wants to reach out. In addition to me's and ask me any questions, that I can be available in case we run out of time.
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to now continue with the presentation, and then we'll bring you back in about 15 minutes to partner with me, Tiffany, in answering the Q&A questions, if that's all right. All right. So I wanted to talk more about how action learning, I think, can support emancipatory organizational development, the way we talked about it before. And I know in the announcement I talked about kind of design principles, but I do think that's a little bit too linear in this context to talk about design principles. I would much rather talk about balance of intervention in the sense that, action learning coaches follow a tried and tested script. And they try to lean out of the conversation as much as possible so groups can handle themselves and only intervene when it's really needed. So as a coach, you try to take a really humble, leaned back approach. But in order for action learning to have the results, to produce results and to be productive, there needs to be a balance of intervention, I would say. And I tried to describe that. This is kind of a new, I've never presented this before, but I think it might be a helpful way. So I'm just going to do that. To dig a little bit deeper also into this emancipatory aspect. First of all, as an action learning coach, you're dealing with dynamics and mechanism of power. That also goes to the question that Anthony asked. By dealing with power well, with these power dynamics well, the result ultimately can be that you unlock real knowledge because you're revealing conflicting interests. I think what I see through observation is that the tougher discussion topics that are included in these problems that we're trying to solve, um, the problems that are really uncomfortable or tense, that bring tensity to any conversation, um, include a myriad of perspectives, and we're not really exploring those perspectives. By exploring those perspectives, and finding comfort in exploring these different interests that people have, we can discover ways also of moving forward. We just have to be comfortable to look at the adversity and to allow for it. Coaches can deal with power in these sessions and find a healthy kind of balance of power, I would say, by being light and by playing with it, by balancing it, by B. Carson, who at the time when I was being certified as a coach was the president of the World Institute for Action Learning USA, and also of the Global Institute, the Global board. She uses this phrase called the coach needs to be the biggest personality in the room. You need to be able to completely lean out of the process and just let the group handle themselves, and you need to be able to lean in with your personality and take over authority whenever it's needed. You need to provide that safety. So an exchange of power perspectives can happen, I would say. That is one big challenge in coaching these sessions. And by the way, even though I am a senior action learning coach, the next step would be to be a master action learning coach for whatever those layers mean, or those levels of kind of seniority. This is a process that is, it's like pushing an ocean through a straw. I know, and this is also why I like it, I will never stop learning about doing this better as a team coach, as an action learning team coach. There will always be challenges, and deep reflection, personal reflection is needed to position yourself as a coach in these sessions. Thinking about also going to Anthony's question, thinking about also what is the impact of my coaching as a white cisgendered male. There is an impact. I need to be aware of that. I need to study it. I need to ask feedback about that. But there's many other attributes and dynamics as well. You need to become masterful at managing those power dynamics, and also realizing that you, as an individual coach, will never be able to see through all of them. The other aspect to find the balance is voice. So making sure that the group can profoundly appreciate and hold space for all experiences. That starts with assembling the right group. Knowing that with 8 people at the table, they can only be kind of representative of those 8 voices, not for all voices. And also knowing that, how do I put that? Knowing that not everybody wants to necessarily participate in the same way. It is natural in a group that some people speak a little bit more than others. There's nothing wrong with that. Those differences need to be allowed. If one perspective starts dominating the conversation, you'll need to intervene as a coach. What I've seen many times is that the experts or the managers at the table will start pushing for a certain solution, and maybe unintentionally hijacking the conversation by speaking the whole time, or forgetting about this rule that you can only make statements in response to a question. If that happens, a way to deal with that is to ask the question, for instance, if a manager is dominating the conversation and their name is Maria, or I don't know, their name is Maria, it doesn't really matter. Ask the question, has anyone in the group noticed, no, how are we doing? I would ask the question, how are we doing with the balance of participation? And just let the group answer that. Or ask, have we noticed this manager at the table has anybody else noticed that this manager at the table is speaking the majority of the time? That's a fact. What is the impact of that on our group process? And how do we want to handle that? A third dynamic is about containment, providing the containment for this group to perform as a team. To make sure that as a coach, you are creating conditions for learning and you're not setting directions. I've had a lot of conversations over the past years about when you use action learning, it is a tool, it is a process, it is a means to achieve a goal. Yes, you can use action learning to resolve conflict. You can use it to increase performance. You can use it to be more inclusive. You can use it to drive up sales. I don't know, it could be many different goals, but what that goal is not determined by the coach, it's determined by the group. You're just providing a conversational context to get there. And the coach should, as far as I'm concerned, have as least as possible, little as possible to say about what the direction of the learning should be. And the last dynamic that I think is important to be able to balance is confidence. This can be a liberating process. I think in most cases, people are really, after some experience, enchanted by the process because they just discover this human connection where they would say, gosh, I never realized this perspective that is so real to this other person. I never even came up in my mind that it existed, but it's so vital in understanding the problem. And also in breaking down the problem, they'll experience that almost all problems are, there is an existential element to it. And in that sense, there is compassion for somebody else owning a certain problem. That's another effect that I think builds confidence, I would say. You're not alone, basically. That's the experience. And then the message that change is possible working through really complex, complicated problems. We need to keep a growth mindset if we want to get to that change, and we need to trust the process. Those are requirements to get there. And even at times when we are really, really, really stuck, we can find confidence in those beliefs. One more slide, and then I'm going to open this up for more discussion. So all of that being said, I would say, for myself as an action learning coach, sometimes I really succeed at doing all of that in an action learning session, but not always. And definitely, this is the challenge, right? To kind of achieve that balance of power and voice and confidence and containment in these sessions. It's not, in that sense, completely manageable. What is manageable is the trust in the process, and that if we stick with it, in the end, we always get to some form of resolution with groups. But it might sometimes take a little bit more time or require some failure to be able to get there. And that's been a massively interesting learning experience. I talk a lot about that with other action learning coaches. I've definitely learned to be a better learning and development professional also in other ways of working because of being an action learning coach for that matter. And I think you could say that for action learning, but also for wider or other learning applications, this just leads to a list of opportunities to manage learning and organizational better for social justice. I just wanted to make that connection to the conference theme. And I think there are 4 points that we can take into consideration. First of all, um, really making sure that we organize conversations on workers and practitioners' interests in our work. Um, Avoiding the pitfall of just organizing interesting conversations for managers or leaders about strategy. We also have to look at execution. We have to take opportunities as organization professionals to confront organizational practices that unjustly marginalize or privilege different people within an organization. I see that as our role. We have to acknowledge the complexity, context, and contested nature of learning. There is a place for compliance in learning and for training people to stick to very linear processes, definitely, but learning is or should be in any organization much, 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 much more than that. And it includes these dynamics of power and voice and containment and confidence that we have to be cognizant of and that we have to organize for. And fourth, it's important to facilitate learning where possible using power with and not power over. And this is also a reflection on being in the position of a instructor, teacher, coach, um, recognizing I'm doing it now, I'm living it now while I'm talking to all of you in this like super one directional virtual way, recognizing the authority and the power that is projected on you in that activity, and being debunking that where possible, questioning it, being humble about it, and building dialogue and partnership as much as possible, and avoiding the trap of thinking that you do have all the solutions, because nobody does, is my strong conviction. All right, I talked enough. One more polling question before we go into the debrief. When learning is organized in your organization or community, what represents the biggest opportunity for improvement? And I just included those 4 statements there. So organizing conversations on workers or practitioners' interests, confronting organizational practices that unjustly marginalize or privilege different people, acknowledge the complexity, context, and contested nature of learning, or facilitate learning during using democratic power with, not power over approaches. I think we're calibrating. Quite divided picture. All categories score at least 27%, but over half of the responses go to that last item, facilitating learning using democratic power with, not power over approaches. Great. Thank you. So we have 14 minutes left, and we are going to leave you on time because I know we all have more commitments. I want to bring Tiffany back in. And address some more questions. Maybe we can bring Anthony in for a second, if you're okay with that, Anthony.
I think there were some other questions a little further up as well. I think Leonie and Lorraine had some questions related to emotional intelligence and.
Okay, let's have Aki, but who was speaking? I'm sorry, I just don't have line of sight on who was actually speaking. Was that Anthony?
That was Anthony. Hi.
Okay, hi. but let's I know that Akil is looking at the questions and he's coming in as a moderator soon to bring some back to the conversation for us. But what I just was presenting about, did that answer your question, Anthony? What else can we talk about in that regard? The balance.
I do think that the last slides around the impact of the facilitator, the role of the facilitator, to highlight any dynamics that are present, I think is key. And someone mentioned at some point in the chat the training that's needed and the coaching that's needed for the facilitator is so key to this kind of work. I've experienced poor facilitation, and I think when certain dynamics are allowed to run rampant, it could really impact negatively the ability to problem solve. And so the last slide was really poignant for me.
Good to hear.
And the reason why I even asked the question in the first place was because when we were in the first breakout, someone had presented a problem that was a sort of complex social problem related to New York City. And when we were thinking about who would be the 8 people that would be in the conversation, we were talking about making sure that there was a balance of power. And so I was thinking about, well, what does that mean if we're talking about power in an equalized space, quote unquote, within an action learning space? But those dynamics are always present. We're always bringing the identities, even if we don't know someone's job, just the way someone presents themselves physically, phenotype. I mean, there's just so many elements that impact one's interpretation of someone's power. And so the facilitation, I think, is key. I think that's the only point I have.
Yeah, and to stay out of it, to trust people to figure it out themselves. And one thing to add also about, the authority of the group to take action. The process makes sure that the group only can take action to the aspect of the problem, the way they have redefined it, where they are kind of able to take ownership of it. So groups are limited in terms of taking actions that affect other people that are not at that table, without including them in conversation or in the dialogue. In that sense, they are encouraged to take action and they expand their view of what is possible, but also the restriction that you're not supposed to just start influencing other people's lives without them also including them. Yeah. I'm trying to select the next question. There was a question from Anne Garden. Akil just put in the posts. Maybe it's answered already, but if Anne is here, what was your question?
I think you've addressed it. My question, it's an underlying theme throughout this about representation and the choices about who is selected to be in that group.
Yeah.
My experience, there's the issues, the really urgent issues are so complex that limiting the group to 4 to 8 feels that you don't have all the relevant perspectives that are needed, let alone sort of knowledge and experience that are needed. And so I appreciate that 8 is the optimal number for a conversation, but how then do you, and I think you've addressed that with parallel process and so forth, but
Well, and also,
yeah, that feels like a bit of a stumbling
yeah,
block for me.
no,
frankly.
that restriction exists, but it's off. What I've seen in practice often is that those 8 people will start, and one of the actions that they will take, what they will realize because of the session, is that more voices will need to be included. And one of the actions that they will plan for in that session as a next step is to organize a way to include more people or other people. And that can take shape in different ways. Possibly take shape by the next time we meet, we're going to replace some people. And the other way is we're just going to have another sort of meeting where we can include more people. Maybe there will be a town hall, or maybe there will be another type of organization. Just there is a limitation in the tried and tested while action learning format to not include more than 8 people. Just means that that process can then not be used, but you could still practice the principles of action learning in larger conversations, which would be a next step.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking the question. Leonie had a question. If it's still relevant, Leonie, feel free to come.
Yes, thank you so much for all this. So inspiring. I guess my question was also around representation, but maybe another side of it, another angle, which was how do you deal with a situation where you know someone should be at the table, an important stakeholder that should be an integral part of solving the problem, and there's resistance from that person or stakeholder to be at the table. And I guess it could be from a number of reasons, either because they outright represent a group or a faction that does not want to engage at all with that particular problem, or it could be that they feel like they might experience some sort of loss by participating in that problem because they're shy. And basically, how do you deal with that? Have you dealt with that, and how do you engage some of the more, I guess, when there's more difficult, high stakes conversations? I'm just curious. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
What I would say is that's when the agreement, the norms come into it with the group. Are we in agreement that this is an issue? And, like you get deeper there. You try to get to agreement, not about what people necessarily feel, but about the issue itself.
Yeah, I think you're saying, Tiffany, or if I paraphrase it, the problem is now transforming. The problem started maybe as, I don't know, we need a new procurement policy or something like that. I'm just coming up with an example. And then what turns out in the session, I'm just making up a mock example, the people that actually run procurement don't want to be part of the conversation. Now, that's transforming the problem. If the group is realizing that that's the issue, then this is becoming the issue. The problem that we're now solving is not anymore, we don't have a functioning procurement policy. The problem now is we don't know how we can engage others. My problem now is, as a group or as an individual participating, I have no repertoire to speak with this person. And now the session centralizes around that problem, our inability as a group to reach out to the colleague that should be included, and then we're going to be solving for that problem. So that goes to my point about we're setting a stage for learning, but not directions. Going into the process, what you would expect is to leave with a strategy to improve the procurement process. Instead, you're now leaving with a strategy for better including stakeholders. It can completely transform. Lorraine had a question. Is on my next list.
I think Lorraine left.
Okay. And then a very Dutch name, Guus, had a question. Is Guus still here?
I have to unmute, so because it's still here. Hello, Mies.
Hi.
We met a few years ago in Amersfoort.
Oh, yes. Now I see your face and I remember.
What you suggest in your presentation is that the role of the action learning coach is quite important. And my question is, what is your perspective on the background of the coach? Because with only a few days training, most of the people have big difficulties in holding the space and creating security, etc.
Yeah,
How do you do that?
that's a good question. I appreciate it. I think anybody can learn, almost anybody, not anybody. Many people can learn to be a really good action learning coach. We have to give them the, and this is practicing action learning philosophy, we have to give them the trust to just get started and get better through experience. There can be no learning without action and no action without learning. The assumption that having certain accreditations or degrees would help you be a better coach in action learning philosophy, and I agree with that, is a false assumption. You don't have to be an expert to participate or to lead. That being said, there is very different quality in coaching. That is the consequence of that. But I think anybody who goes through the certification program and completes it well with success can start. But I always encourage people, when I certify them, to start with to not make it too hard on yourself in the beginning. Tiffany, what do you think? You're in certification.
Oh, I'm in the middle of it now. I think practice makes perfect, and the more you do it, the stronger you get. And different interactions also improve your coaching and your leadership in this area. So just continue to do it. I would say keep at it. Even if there were times where you feel like, oh, I should have done this versus that, keep that in mind for the future. But it's a learning process, and but it's a good learning process. It's a process that's very useful, like I said, in life, and just in getting people to open up more, even when they don't want to. So just asking those questions and listening and being persistent has been great. It's been useful in this process.
Okay, thank you.
So Janus is asking in the chat, I'll answer that one, and then I think we have to wrap it up. How can one close an ever-growing web of entangled questions which may stall action before it gets to motion? That's a very interesting question, and that happens in sets where people are practicing this rule of asking questions. They come at it from all sorts of directions, and they're just not using it productively yet. This is also a matter of trusting the process. Groups will learn to use the power of questions better. And if they keep getting stuck, I would say, if I would see in one session them getting stuck and entangled 2 or 3 times, I will ask, how are we doing using the power of questions? How are we doing building on each other's questions? And that brings the dynamic to the awareness of the group members. And then I will ask, so why is it important that we build on each other's questions, or that we disentangle questions? And how can we do that better? And then the group comes up with its own solution. But in order to be productive, groups first have to be allowed to be unproductive. I think we're at time. Please, I think we're going to share this recording as well as the PowerPoint slides. Akil, I see you had not. People should feel free to reach out to me. I know Tiffany already offered as well, to reach out to us to with any questions. We're happy to answer them.
Thank you everyone for showing up. We have a similar workshop coming up on April 14th. I just posted the link here, and I also see Sydney here. So it's on a soul map model, a step-by-step guide for growing consciousness in companies. And we welcome you all there.
Thank you so much, Akil. And I hope to see everyone and I will be a participant in the coming conference meetings. This has been so great. And Tiffany, thank you as well for joining. And I encourage everyone to reach out, connect on LinkedIn. We're open to your feedback. I am open to your feedback for sure. And have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. Take care, guys.
Thanks for coming. Thank you. Bye.